The Hyte Y40 is one of the more interesting cases I've seen in a while, but at $150, should you shortlist it for your next build, or are there better options out there for less? The mid-range case market is in a pretty good place right now, as many features from high-end products trickle down into more affordable options, and we're seeing some real innovation in design, with companies like Fractal and Lian Li leading the way. Hyte entered the market last year with the Revolt 3 and Y60, both of which looked to bring something new to the table. Their newest is this, the Y40, and even if the tagline S-tier aesthetic case is cringy as hell, so far I can say Hyte hasn't really missed when delivering a compelling, functional, and rather unique product in their first 3 tries. The Y40 comes in 3 color variants. You have standard black, a nice looking white, and what I think is probably the most bold but probably niche, this vibrant red finish. The red does only apply to the exterior. You don't get corresponding red interior panels, unfortunately, but you do get a matching PCIe riser card, which we'll talk about in a minute. The retail on this bad boy is $149.99, and you can buy them through any number of online retailers where they are readily available, unlike a recent product release that everybody's been scrambling for, the Fractal North, which apparently appears to be permanently sold out. I'm not sure. The exterior of the case has 2 main standout features. The first is the fairly unique airflow design, both on the top of the chassis as well as the back panel. There are flowing grooves cut into the steel backed by a fine mesh, and while I'm not convinced that this allows for any more airflow than standard holes might, it's good to see companies trying to come up with new ways of letting air into the case, or else everything would just kind of devolve into a standard rectangular box covered in perforations. The second thing that strikes you when you look at the Y40 is, of course, the wraparound glass design of the front and the side. The seamless nature of this design is striking in person, as most of the cases that you see emulating this kind of aesthetic will need a metal support at the corner to make the case structure work without sagging. As is, the Y40 is able to pull this off with only the 2 glass panels, which meet at the corner and provide a showcase type of appearance from the side, from the front quarter, or even from directly at the front. Even though it's only a minor change from something that everybody knows, like the 011 Dynamic, the fact that there is no physical separation between the panes of glass actually does create quite a different look and makes the whole presentation significantly cleaner and fresher. To get inside the side glass, the top panel, or the rear panel, Hyte has created a very intuitive toolless system with indented pull tabs. It's pretty easy to grip with your fingertips and pop out the top pins from the case frame, and the bottom of the glass just sits inside of a small channel down here. The whole operation takes maybe a second or 2, and the panel goes back on just as easily. I will say that my Y40 had a pretty tight fitment of the side glass, but I was told that this might just be an issue with pre-production or early run models. Even so, it didn't cause me any actual problems when removing everything. It was fine. I/O on this case gets 1 thumbs up from me, and 1 sideways thumb, I guess. Thumbs way up for the placement, as I think most people would prefer to have easy access to USB ports at the bottom of the front of the case rather than at the top. Most desk configurations these days have the PC tower on the top of the desk and off of the floor, and when you're sitting, the bottom of the case is much easier to plug into than the top is. Thumbs sideways for the connectivity itself. 2 USB 3.0 Type A as well as a Type C connector is, I think, industry standard at this point, and the power switch feels good. I would have liked a reset switch, as there is plenty of room here, and the use of a combo headphone and mic jack requires a splitter dongle if you want to use both, and that's always just a little awkward. I have too many dongles to keep track of at this point. If anybody out there has any kind of a dongle sorting and storage solution, please take all of my money. The interior panels of the case show off Hyte branding with a stylized H molded into the plastic insert. This reveals how Hyte is able to get these panels so stiff without using heavy and expensive thick steel panels. They're actually fairly thin backed by rigid plastic sheets. This also helps keep the weight down and allows for visual flair like this to be implemented. Smart. Like the Y60 before it, Hyte chose to keep the layout limited to vertical GPU mounts only, although they have made significant improvements to GPU ventilation. This is kind of a love it or leave it thing, because I know that most of the builds I've ever done have used traditional GPU horizontal orientation, and I'm not always in love with having my graphics card sit with the fans facing me. But with the Y40, you know what you're getting, and they honestly do it pretty well. Not only does every Y40 come pre-installed with a Gen 4 riser cable, but the cable itself is capped off with this very slick looking insert card that screws securely into one of the half-height expansion slots. I suppose if you're going to require vertical mounting, this is the way to do it. Hyte has also widened the spacing between the motherboard tray and the side glass, and now there are 4 full slots of width here. My XFX 7900 XT is a big boy and still has plenty of room to pull fresh air. Cable routing on the interior is remarkably easy, and Hyte has chosen to take advantage of the GPU vertical layout in an interesting way. Because the graphics card will be mounted essentially in a way that blocks view of the bottom portion of the case, Hyte was free to cut large gaps into the bottom panel for PCIe power wiring as well as any accessories connected to the motherboard along the bottom edge. So even though maybe I would criticize this on other cases as being a little sloppy looking, here it's not even something that you'll ever see, and it gives you more flexibility with cable routing, so that is definitely nice. Below this plastic bottom panel is the PSU chamber, and even in here there are a few cool touches. The first one is that the Y40 comes with one of its 2 included fans mounted as an air intake, blowing upwards into the main chamber. This was an idea that came straight from the Y60, where there are multiple fan mounts in the basement that serve as the primary intake for the entire case. While the main intake on the Y40 is actually elsewhere, this does give some additional ventilation and can pull cool air in from below. The second thing that you can see down here are cable routing channels that help keep loose wiring away from the fan blades. Other than that, the basement is pretty standard, but it's also very open for an easy place to stash your extra cables. Behind the motherboard tray, you can see the layout that includes a removable storage plate. This is really the biggest flaw of the Y40. It doesn't provide a huge amount of options for mounting drives. You can only fit either one 3.5 drive or 2 2.5-inch drives. And while it's certainly reasonable that many builders are moving to mostly M.2 storage, there are a lot of legacy builds out there that would struggle to swap to the Y40 because of this and this alone. There is a good amount of room for cable management though at 26mm, although do note that this becomes significantly reduced towards the front of the case where the fan mounts are. I'm almost ashamed to show you guys my cable management experience in here, because honestly, when it comes to test builds, I usually just kind of shove everything in and hope it closes. But on the Y40, it was remarkably easy to just use a few ties and bundle everything up. And I had no issue at all closing the back panel. If you put even a little bit of time and effort into things, I'm sure this can be a very tidy space. The primary intake for the case comes from these 2 side mounts for fans, and here's where I have not necessarily a criticism, but maybe a commentary. This is a $150 case, which falls squarely in the mid-range market segment, and people might be happy that they can get a fairly fully featured and well-built product for that much money. But that's not a real cost, because the Y40 only comes with 2 fans, and neither of them are for this very important area of the case. You absolutely are required to populate this side intake area with either 2 120 or optimally 2 140mm fans, or else your components will bake up nicely with a crispy brown top layer. I've put 2 140mm Be Quiet Silent Wings Pro 4 fans here to go along with my stealthy build, and while you don't necessarily need to spend quite that much, you have to figure in the cost of buying fans with this case. It's not simply a matter of buy it and build it. The fans pull air in from the back panel through vented slots like we saw at the top of the case. And again, you can see a fine mesh filter to reduce your dust bunnies. The top of the case is really where you want to be putting your radiators, and luckily you can fit up to a 360 here as there are 3 120mm fan mounts. Do note that the top of the case cannot fit 140mm fan sizes, so if you plan to use a 280mm cooler, you need to mount it next to the motherboard. So how is the overall build experience? Everything went pretty well, and it was actually really great wiring everything up using the space behind the tray. I do have a few notes to share. 1. There are no grommets anywhere to be found here. Ultimately, not a functional issue, but rather an aesthetic one, as if you're sloppy with your cable management, you'll be able to see lots of stray wires through the large slots next to the motherboard. 2. Dropping in a fully prepped motherboard has a little more nuance to it in this case than in any other, just due to the pre-installation of the PCIe riser card. You have to unscrew it and kind of prop it out of the way while dipping in the motherboard kind of behind it. You can always just remove the entire assembly, but that is an extra step and it would add a little time. Number 3, this case can fit monster air coolers. I think I've proven that here. Height isn't a problem, even when I have to offset the front fan by a significant amount to clear the memory modules. However, I almost could not fit my graphics card in here as a result. And the 7900 XT MERT card is probably the max dimensions that you could cram in here if you wanted to use a cooler like this Noctua D15. I could not physically fit an RTX 4080 FE in this space. This is a risk that you take with the required vertical mounting orientation and wouldn't be an issue with horizontal mounts. Overall, I'm going to give the Y40 a recommendation. At $150, it generally provides a good value and a very cool aesthetic. The seamless glass is pretty unique to Hyte's products, at least for now, and the other user-friendly features like the well-constructed pop-off panels, bottom-mounted I/O, and very good cable management options seem like a win. The minor inconveniences that I encountered in my build might be more the result of my component choices than anything else, and I don't think that they really detract heavily from what the Y40 is offering. Just do keep in mind the need for additional fan purchases, but other than that, I think you'll have a fantastic showpiece at a pretty reasonable price. And definitely get it in red. This colorway is super bold and in your face, and I kind of dig it. Thanks for watching, everybody. What are your thoughts on the Hyte Y40? Let me know down below in the comments. Also, don't forget to check out my CES coverage where I cover more of Hyte's new products, and get subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. I'll see you in the next video.